Hello and welcome to a new video. Today I wanted to talk a bit about my thoughts on dialects and pronunciations when speaking historical languages, what I use and why I choose to speak the way that I do when it comes to the biblical and historical languages. First, I will go through the languages and dialects for those that have not seen my previous videos. When I make videos in Classical Syriac, I use the Western dialect. In Biblical Hebrew and Biblical Aramaic, I use both the Yemenite and a type of Sephardi. In Ancient Common Greek, I use the modern pronunciation. Also, I use modern pronunciation when reading in English, German, and French, including the historical forms of those. So, for example, 16th century English or German, the way that these languages are pronounced today. So first of all, in Syriac, I consider both Western and Eastern Syriac to be legitimate good dialects of the language. I personally use the Western dialect because that dialect is the one that seems to be close to what came from Edessa, modern-day Turkey and Syria, and what the early Syriac church spoke, and also spoken in the areas that the apostles traveled within, those areas where they traveled within. Now there are Syriac speakers in many places in the Assyrian diaspora, but the Assyrians have a clear history both of Western and Eastern dialects, and I like both of them. But I also think that the Western is slightly easier to read, but that's just my personal experience. Then when it comes to Hebrew and Aramaic, Biblical Aramaic, I like the modern pronunciation of Hebrew. I have nothing against it. It's a good form of the language. But I like how other forms make it easier just by hearing or speaking to differentiate between different letters, like het and chaf, for example, which is otherwise pronounced the same between a vowel that accompanies the aleph and one that accompanies the ain, between the resh and the gimel without a doubling of the consonant, which is otherwise pronounced rimel. So there is an ambiguity there if you are not fluent, and if you don't know the exact context, then it can become a bit confusing what exact letters are being used. These dialects are not matters of historical reconstructions, because several of them have survived into the modern times, even though they are endangered and are becoming smaller. There are multiple pronunciations, but the Temani and Sephardi type is the ones that I've been using, or Yemenite, and the type that Sephardi, I believe, was what Abraham Shmuelov used, and it is his type that I currently make videos in. I used to do it in the Yemenite, but I feel that the Sephardi one is sort of in the middle of the spectrum of simple to advanced levels of distinct sounds that are being used of the abjad or the letters. So this is the one that I'm currently using. Then when it comes to Greek, I choose modern Greek, and the reason why I do not choose historical reconstructions is that there are, even though there are probably good and legitimate reconstructions of Greek, there are also some that are probably not very historic, and there are many different opinions among scholars on what is a legitimate reconstruction and not. Also, it was probably not even pronounced only one way. Let's say in the first century AD, there were probably differences in how someone in Egypt spoke Common Greek compared to someone speaking the exact same words in Corinth or in Athens. This is important and probably the case in many of these languages. There isn't just one, like for 1,000 years away, that um, it was pronounced that was never changed or is exactly the same everywhere, especially if the language is spoken over a large area and over many centuries. There will be many different forms and variations. This is what happens naturally with languages. Um, there is a good video by the YouTube channel Greek for All on this topic that I will link in the description, of ancient Greek, how it was pronounced, and arguments for modern Greek. I try to avoid anachronisms. Anachronisms are forms that are not historical or inconsistent, basically. For example, sometimes when reconstructions are coming from multiple different sources. If a language has 20 letters and someone discovers that 10 of those letters sounded one way in one country in one century, and the other 10 letters of the language, of the language's alphabet, sounded a certain way in a different country in a different century, then they combine those two periods and it becomes a new combination of sounds that never existed historically. So it becomes like a Frankenstein monster of combinations of sounds that did not exist in one time, in one place historically. Modern pronunciation is the unbroken living form and is perhaps not very historical, but it is consistent in that way. And for English, French, and German, basically with these languages, I'm not so familiar with historical reconstructions and the history of sound shifts and such. So I speak the way that natives speak these languages. Thanks for watching, and if there are any questions, feel free to comment.